All right, guys, here we go. We're going to do
Good
my
afternoon.
local
It is
news
Tuesday,
first.
September the 4th, and we are very active out in the tropics. Still tracking 3 areas of concern, 2 that have names, 1 that will most likely have a name, the next name on the list, Helene, in the next probably 3 to 4 days. It's a very healthy-looking tropical wave. We'll start off here with Tropical Storm Gordon, the latest advisory from 11 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center. You know, it's been out over open waters for nearly 24 hours now, over very warm waters, and we were expecting this to really ramp up in intensity. It didn't really do so overnight. He was having a little more trouble with some wind shear than originally thought, but look what's going on here in the last couple of frames. We were seeing a lot of the convection, the thunderstorm activity, displaced off to the east of the center. Now that convection is beginning to wrap around the center, and once it becomes symmetrical, we'll likely see that increase in intensity, possibly to a Category 1 hurricane as it heads to the north and west. It probably has another 12 hours or so, I'd say, over open, very warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico before making landfall somewhere near Gulfport, Mississippi, around midnight tonight. So again, right now, a tropical storm. You see that convection, very high, cold cloud tops beginning to wrap around that center of circulation there of Gordon. Here's the latest track from the National Hurricane Center. Does, in fact, have it intensified to a Category 1 storm, increasing those sustained winds up another 10 miles per hour from where it currently is to 75, just on the low end side of a Category 1. You need 74 mile per hour winds or greater, and then making landfall somewhere around Gulfport, Biloxi, Mississippi as we get into tonight. Now, very much in consensus here, in agreement with all the model guidance. It's all within that cone of uncertainty. A few outliers off to the south and southwest there, but pretty good bet it's going to be making landfall somewhere in Mississippi, just to the east of New Orleans area late tonight. It certainly has plenty of fuel available to it. On its forecast track, it's moving over warm waters in excess of 83, 84, 85, even as high as 87-degree water. Very deep ocean heat content. We talked about that yesterday. It's not just heat at the surface. It extends down to a depth, especially when you get closer to the coastline here as it's moving towards making a landfall. So we do have various warnings up. Hurricane warnings all in the red in the area's greatest likelihood to see that landfall of the center of Gordon. And then bookended on both sides are the tropical storm warnings for those winds. Has a larger wind field out there from where you'll find the hurricane force wind. So now we're within that 24-hour time frame to talk impacts of Gordon and what it's going to likely do as it makes landfall later on today. Flooding, you know, it's a tropical system. We're going to have a lot of rainfall associated with it, so flooding will be a big problem. 4 to 8 inches of rain possible in some of the areas closest to the northeast quadrant. That's where we're going to find the heaviest banding coming in up and over the Gulf of Mexico. And also in that same area, the eastern flank, the northeastern quadrant, storm surge potential is there, especially in these areas. They're particularly vulnerable to storm surges, and of course the winds with the tropical system. The closer you get to the center, possibly those gusts up and over 60 miles per hour, if not a little bit higher as you get closer to that center there. All right, now I want to stress what's going on here. I'm going to talk about storm surge and how that works. This is for explanation purposes. This is not Gordon at all. Okay, this is a major hurricane here, but this is just for explanation purposes. All right, with storm surge, you get the wind piling up the water closer to a coastline. So on the eastern side of this particular landfalling hurricane, you'd get the most potential for some storm surge. That wind constantly blowing up against the beach and the coastline pulls that water up and over the land masses and leads to some flooding, especially in low-lying areas. You're looking at areas that are, you know, between a foot to 10 feet above sea level, likely seeing some inundation here from some storm surges as we get into tonight and tomorrow with that landfall possible. Now, not so much a probability anymore in terms of seeing tropical storm force winds. It's a likelihood. It is going to happen. The purple shading here, 100% probability of seeing those winds in excess of 40 miles per hour over tropical storm strength, probably even some hurricane force wind gusts in there. In fact, a new product I'm going to show you here, this is going to be the wind radii from Gordon as it moves forward. This is a computer model. This is not exactly how it looks right now, but what you're seeing here, the yellow shading kind of looks like a kidney bean. This is the extent of the tropical storm force winds. Okay, it extends out, say about 30, 35, 40 miles from the center there. So quite a small wind field. And then you're looking at some oranges in there. That's going to be winds in excess of 55 miles per hour. As we move forward, it strengthens some. You notice that area of 55 mile per hour wind speeds does expand slightly. And just before landfall, we start to see a little bit of red. That red is hurricane force winds, 74 miles per hour or greater. Very small area that would be happening, but likely over Gulfport and Biloxi area in Mississippi, greatest likelihood of seeing those strongest winds. And in turn, this area here would likely see the worst storm surges from Gordon. All right, let's jump to our second area to talk about now, and that is Florence. A new update on that. Florence is now a hurricane. A Category 1, 75 mile per hour winds, gusts to 90 miles per hour. Now, this is way out in the middle of the Atlantic. How do we know that this has winds at that speed? Well, satellite data is what we're using here. We're using a lot of different tools to kind of depict how fast the wind speed is on there, how fast the winds are getting ruffled up. The colors of the sea foam is what they get. It's the radiation that it emits there. Some radiometers are used to get that wind speed. It's very, very interesting stuff. We'll get into that in another video. Not so much today. We got a time constraint today. But here's how it looks on satellite presentation. It's kind of interesting that it did strengthen because it is encountering some dry air. It's got some pretty good convection around the entire center of circulation there. Very symmetrical. But as we switch up the satellite imagery and show you the water vapor, this is all dry air. Off to the west of the storm, it is moving into that dry air, and it's pulling it into its circulation. So it's kind of interesting that it did strengthen. I don't expect it to strengthen much more in the next couple of days because it will be in this dry air. It's also in some marginal sea surface temperatures, so you need 80 or higher, so it's around 79, 80 right now. But after we get past the next few days, it is forecast to move into an area certainly conducive for it to re-strengthen if it does weaken any, with sea surface temperatures there.
He's talking about Hurricane Florence.
Only get warmer the
They
farther
just
west
upgraded
goes.
it.
Also, right now, it is encountering a little bit of some unfavorable wind shear. Those are winds coming over the top of the system and blowing the thunderstorm activity, displacing it from the center. Not doing a whole lot to it right now, but it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets a little bit better. You see some more favorable conditions here off towards the west. So that brings to light here the steering pattern and where Florence will be heading. This is why long-term tracking forecasts for tropical systems are so difficult. There are so many variables that get exponentially greater the farther out in time you go. So the timeline we're going to be looking for is this coming weekend that we get a much better handle on what will happen. And it will depend on two different things. Its placement and its strength at that point in time. If we have a stronger Florence, say a Category 1, where it is right now, or stronger from there, then we're likely to see a recurvature to the north and northeast out to sea, a fish storm. That scenario would be driven by upper level steering. When a storm gets strong enough, it's influenced more by the upper levels, and there's stronger steering in the upper levels right now in the area that it would be. Now, if Florence at that point in time is weaker, less than a Category 1, a high-end tropical storm by that matter, it is going to be steered by low-level flow, meaning that it will continue on a west-northwest track. It avoids the recurvature, and eventually, as it makes it far enough to the west, it'll get stuck under a big blocking ridge that'll set up over New England, and that could in turn threaten the east coast of the United States. Now, yesterday we had talked about how, a lot of the models were saying, oh, the east coast is a little more in play. It's amazing how things change in time when you're this far out from an event. Now it's kind of gone a little bit more out to sea, favoring that scenario a little bit more because of the recent strengthening of Florence. But here's how it looks. The latest updated cone of uncertainty from the National Hurricane Center does have it indeed weakening back down to a tropical storm, but then in the tail end of the 5-day cone, back up to a Category 1, so recurvature off to the north would be possible. But notice I put some models on there as well. Not all of them are agreeing. Let's talk about the GFS, the ensembles, right? This is one model that's run several different times with different variables. They're tweaking it just a little bit to see what would happen if something was to change. All of them in agreement, and then look, there are still a fair amount that do take it towards the eastern seaboard, a lot more that are drifting farther to the west, but still do the recurvature and miss making landfall. This would certainly create some very heavy surf along the eastern seaboard, some coastal erosion, that sort of deal here. But today, the GFS is the one more west. Yesterday, it was the European. Let's compare the two, right? The two major global models. We have the American in the yellow, the GFS, and the red will be the European. Watch as we go out in time how this kind of flip-flopped. Right? Very much in agreement here as we get into Thursday and Friday. Then they start to depart a little bit. We have a stronger scenario of Florence with the European. The GFS is pretty strong at that point as well. If you can see right there, that is Bermuda. All right, the GFS certainly has Bermuda being threatened by this system. And if you are in Bermuda, I would be worried about this and keep tabs on it, because one of these two models is certainly showing an impact around that area. So here we are, Tuesday of next week. Notice the European already out to sea, gone. But the GFS is pretty much mimicking what the Euro was showing yesterday, but it does still keep it offshore, just recurvature later on. So this is going to be certainly interesting how this plays out.
Okay, guys.
And of course, we have our third wave that we're going to be watching. That is up to a 70% chance of developing in Helene in the next 5 days. Probably likely sooner.
Helene.
It is starting to see an overall broad rotation, but still a little bit disorganized, has some work to do before it can get that name. All right, that's all I got to say today. I hope today's video was a little bit shorter, but I think I got to the
guys.
you need to know. We'll have an update for you tomorrow after Gordon has made landfall tomorrow
God
morning.
bless. Thank you for watching. Have yourself an awesome day.
Just Tin Pan Dages, or you can find me on